Welcome everyone. Today I would like to talk to you about the Viking-Muslim Norman Arab culture of Sicily. And I would like to start with the name, first of all. Why Viking-Muslim? Why Arab-Norman? I definitely prefer to utilize the latter because I feel that Arab-Norman better frames the culture of Sicily between the 7th and the 11th century, also due to historical and cultural facts that demonstrates the interaction between the native Sicilians with other populations and cultures of the Mediterranean basin, but also because it better frames the cultural milieu of the island in the context of something that is religious, cultural, linguistic, historical, and identity-based across many, many centuries. So why Sicily? Well, first of all, because similar to what happened in the Iberian Peninsula with Al-Andalus, Sicily was deeply connected to the development of religion, spirituality, and linguistic and cultural frameworks in the Mediterranean area. And this is since the very beginnings of civilizations in Sicily. We have to think about the Phoenicians, we have to think about the Romans, the Greeks, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Berber, the unification of Italy, but also the influence of France, Spain, the Kingdom of Two Sicily, and the development of multiple interaction at each intersection of the centuries. Now, one of the things that I like to discuss is the influence of Islamic and Arab culture, not only on the linguistic framework of the island, words such as salam aleikum, terms and last names such as Musumeci, for instance, Ammiraglio, and so on and so forth, which demonstrates, of course, the Berber, Coptic, Arabic component on one side, but also the Arabic, Islamic, Muslim, and eventually Ottoman component on the other side, but also the deep connection with the Indo-European, pre-Indo-European, and Semitic component of the languages spoken in Sicily to this day. In fact, the Siciliano, the Sicilian dialect, albeit a fully Romance language, an Italian language of the Roman type, a full representative of the cultura latina. And this is still relevant, especially when we think about poetry developed in the 12th century that was eventually Tuscanized, one could say. The framework of Sicilian culture is also the heir of all these dominations. And similar to what happened to other non-Indo-European or pre-Indo-European languages, the Oscan language, for example, the Faliscan, the Tersanian, the Etruscan, the Rhetic language, the Sicilian dialect was indeed the heir of multiple dominations over the centuries. And of course, because we are mostly focused on the Islamic conquest of the island, I would like to start with that. So one could say that Sicily, or Sicilia in all these languages, was under Islamic rule for the late 9th all the way to the late 11th century. And it became very, very renowned and prosperous with its capital of Palermo, Balarm. And it was a part of the Byzantine Empire at the time when Muslim forces from Ifriqiya, which is in modern-day Tunisia, launched the very first series of raids in 652. And during the reign of the Aghlabi dynasty of Ifriqiya, there were a series of conflicts, roughly between 827 to 982, and those go under the name of Muslim conquest of Sicily. And when Taormina fell, that was the main isolated fortress that defined the conquest. And the island itself was under Arab Muslim rule until it was conquered again by the Normans, similar to what happened in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain with the Reconquista, and the Normans reconquered the island in the late 11th century. So the raids of the Muslim Arabs did not threaten the Byzantine control over the island, which was to some extent very peaceful and accommodating and open to multiple influences. But the opportunity for the Aghlabid emirs of Ifriqiya came in 827 when the commander of the island fleet, Euphemus, rose in revolt actually against the Byzantine Emperor Michael II, was defeated by loyalist forces and driven from the island. And then he actually saw the age of the Aghlabids, which of course was an Arab dynasty. Now, because of this expansion, a strong component that had theological frameworks as its base also became relevant, because there was a strong jihad component in this development. And when the Arab landed on the island, eventually Euphemus was quickly sidelined. And after a few attempts that did fail, for instance, they tried to conquer Syracuse, but eventually they were able to establish themselves, also with helps from Al-Andalus, from the Umayyad Al-Andalus, and they eventually took Palermo in 831. I would like to stress that Sicily became part of a civilization that extended from North Africa to the Middle East, also thanks to this Islamic and Arab domination. They started in Palermo, which by the way was formerly known as Zis in Punic, because that is their heritage before the Greco-Roman component. And eventually they developed the city into one of the major cities of the Islamic Mediterranean through trades and scholarship and culture, and eventually politics as well. Now, it is important to understand that Muslim Sicily was not just an Arab cultural presence, but it was also organized through religious principle, through Islam. And in fact, after the Roman conquest, Islam remained an important part of the Sicilian society. Now, the monarch itself returned to Christianity, similar to what happened in Spain. However, Norman rulers preserved many Islamic institutions because they were essential to the administration of the kingdom. If you think about the institution of the Divan. Arabic also remained a language of government, and Islamic artistic tradition merged with their precursor, the heirs of the Christian and Jewish cultural framework in the island. All the monuments, the churches, the palaces, etc., etc. There are many of them. For instance, the churches of Palermo, Cefalù, Monreale, which all combine Norman and Arab architecture. They combine Byzantine Christian theology, Islamic artistic techniques, old Sicilian Latin calligraphy with Arab calligraphy, and they demonstrate cultural cooperation and mutual understanding. It's also true that Arab craftsmen contributed to Christian buildings and vice versa. So there was a connection of intellect, artistry, science, and of course, philosophy and theology. Especially under the courts of Roger II and Frederick II, some of the most important figures, not just in Sicily and the kingdom, the two Sicilies, and of course, Naples as well, also during the Bourbon dynasty and the domination of foreign powers, of course, Habsburg, Spain, France, the Papal City, etc., etc. But in general, to what became the development of European university institutions. Now, of course, Bologna is the oldest university in the world, followed by Oxford and Cambridge and Salamanca and Paris and so on, and many others around the world. But of course, one should not underestimate the fact that in the Middle East and in North Africa, older institutions that were madrasas eventually turned to university later on. Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, for instance, Egypt. There are many examples of Fez, for instance. At the court of Roger II and Frederick II, you could find scientific and philosophical exchange where all scholars, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, were able to interact on a daily basis. And in fact, Frederick II in particular inherited a passion for astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine through the Arab influence on top of the Greco-Roman tradition. So the memory of Islamic Sicily continued into modern times. And I'd like to mention some of my favorite philosophers, artists, Sufi, musicians, for instance, Franco Battiato, Magno Sgalambro, Gabriele Mandelkhan, and many others. I would also like to mention two of my favorite writers. One is Giuseppe Tomasi, and you probably understand why, Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa, and the other one is Leonardo Sciascia, because they both create this beautiful picture of the influence of Islamic, Arabic, Norman, Greek, Byzantine, Roman, Latin, Punic, Phoenician culture throughout the islands. And they also represent this beautiful, to some extent, melancholic struggle that the Sicilian people faced throughout the centuries. And I want to stress this because it is not true that, as some might have said, Sicilians are just a product of a melting pot. Sicilians, also from a genetic standpoint, are very much connected to their ancestors, but they were so enriched and culturally flexible and open to all these dominations and influence that they made them their own. And it's a beautiful story/history to tell, especially because one cannot but be in total awe and admiration for the Arab Norman aesthetic that one can find on this beautiful island. So whether one reads The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa, or all the beautiful work by Leonardo Sciascia, one cannot be in total admiration of this beautiful culture. There are a few things that I would like to say in this regard, because there are multiple foundations and religious component in this new civilization, because Sicily had been a Byzantine province dominated by Latin and Greek language and Catholic Orthodox Christianity. Now, of course, one important thing to understand is that the schism between the Roman Catholic, or the Catholic in general, and the Eastern Orthodox/Oriental Orthodox did not really occur, or did not occur in the same manner in the Sicilian Peninsula. In fact, throughout southern Italy, and to some minor extent also to northeastern part of Italy, modern Italy, for instance, the Venetian Republic, the schism was not applied in a similar manner, also because the cultural framework made this population much more united that, for instance, one could observe in Eastern Europe, in the Balkan area, where there was more of a stronger distinction and transition from the Bogumilstvo, for instance, the Bogumil component, for instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, towards, let's say, Serbian Orthodoxy or Croat/Croatian Catholicism on the other side. In Sicily, in Italy, this transition was much more fluid to some extent and more nurturing, also because of the geocultural and specifically geographic areas where those churches were located, which might remind the traveler of Meteora, for instance, or Mount Athos in Greece. In the Sicilian culture influenced by Arabs, there are many things that change, or better said, there were many things that improved. For instance, agriculture, administration, business, commerce, and education. Despite only about 50% of native Sicilians having converted to Islam, which was slightly different than the equivalent situation in the Balkans, despite the fact that the taxes were indeed applied in very similar manners. And also is true that the Arab elites often occupied administrative and military position, But there were also Berber groups from North Africa that formed an important part of the broader Muslim population. And from a religious perspective, the Quran provided the central revelation of Islamic belief in Sicily as well. So the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad guided religious practice and moral behavior. Sharia regulated important aspects of life, marriage, inheritance, communal responsibilities. And all of this guided the Muslim presence in Sicily. Now, talking about agriculture, because of the history of the agricultural transformation before the Islamic conquest of Sicily, there were great achievements of the local population that taught Arabs new development in agriculture, and conversely, the Arab component that also was influenced by Al-Andalus in turn helped the local population develop more of a consistency in this commerce, economy, and structure overall. Now, the Islamic agricultural knowledge was expanded by employing the local workforce, which developed a solid expertise in antiquity and eventually developed advanced irrigation methods, expanded cultivation of crops, for instance, citrus fruits, sugarcane, cotton, and new varieties of grain. And this innovation increased economic productivity and continued to influence Sicilian agriculture all the way after the Norman conquest. Now, because the Normans completed the Reconquista, we could say, in 1091, they did introduce a new political order, but did not eliminate the Islamic foundation of Sicilian society, the Arabic influence on Sicilian society. In fact, despite of the fact that the ruling dynasty was Christian and Christianity became again the official religion of the kingdom, but in practice, the Muslim community of Sicily continued to maintain religious practices centered on the Quran, Sharia, and communal worship. And the Norman rulers understood that. They understood that the prosperity of Sicily depended also upon previous administrative knowledge and institution of the Muslim population, which was a strong component that prevented the kings from replacing Islamic structures and incorporate them into a Christian kingdom in which the people of the book collaborate, which is a very important aspect of Sicilian culture. So the same thing for Roger. Roger inherited a society in which Latin, Greek, Berber, Arab Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived together. And the royal administration, again, was seen as a continuation of the role that they won, which demonstrated that Norman Sicily developed through adaptation of institution inherited from all these layers. And in fact, all the royal documents that one could read, one can read them in Latin and Greek for obvious reason, but also in Arabic, and also developing their own linguistic form, similar to what happened in Bosnia with the Arabica, following, of course, the Glagolica and the Bosančica, together with the Cyrillica. There was a multi-layered component to the way the language developed, all the way through the religious identity and ethnic identity as well. So it is true that the relationship between Muslims and the Norman state per se was not peaceful, but one has to remember that the very concept of state and the way it's viewed in modern times does not quite fit into that aspect of the Arab Islamic Sicilian culture. For instance, when the Norman institution expanded, many Sicilian Muslim communities lost some of their prestige and so relocated to other areas, for instance, Lucera under Frederick II. And this is a beautiful yet complex aspect of the way Roger's kingdom and rule affected the development of Sicilian culture. Another thing was his openness. Roger was very open, especially towards culture, architecture, mathematics, science, philosophy. One of the most famous examples is geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi, who worked at Roger's court and produced the Tabula Rogeriana, which is one of the most detailed geographical works of the medieval world. And this was indeed possible because the Islamic civilization had preserved some of the Greco-Roman culture, especially in the areas of geography, astronomy, mathematics, and scientific observation, and in turn developed new areas of scientific inquiry. And medieval Muslims inherited knowledge from the United background, the Greek, the Persian, the Indian civilization as well, and all of the areas in between. One can think of Alexander the Great, for instance. And he also wanted to portray himself as a ruler that went beyond the single cultural tradition. And since we mentioned tradition, what better way to understand the influence of the Norman Arabic Islamic culture in Sicilian music, for instance? This is an example of Siculo-Arabic music whereby the listener can understand the linguistic component, the transition between Old Sicilian language through its dialect form, the connection with Arabic, with Maltese, and with the musical tradition of Southern Italy, of Byzantium, of Al-Andalus, as well as the Ladino tradition in Spain. Now, earlier we mentioned multiple dynasties such as the Bourbon from France, the Habsburg from Austria, of course, the Austro-Hungarian Empire later on, the influence of Spain, the influence of the Papal State, the Byzantine influence, and the Greco-Roman influence. And this Germanic, Teutonic, Nordic component, of course, is also present in the Hohenstaufen dynasty, to which Frederick II belonged. But he really was connected to Sicily and to Palermo, and this uniquely Sicilian environment, which we can find, of course, in the most important university in Sicily, was also a result of the influence of Islam and this Arabic tradition of science and philosophy. And this was thanks to Muslim scholars, translators, and scientists, which, interesting enough, is the story that is incorporated by this Abate Vella in the book by Leonardo Sciascia, in which this abbot, is creating this fake Maltese Arabic language to demonstrate that certain rules that apply to the domains of the aristocracy in Sicily did not actually find justification in the original document. So his argument was that a lot of the nobility in Sicily that owned very important pieces of land did not do so following the law, but in contradiction to what the Arabic original text implied. Now, it is an interesting book because, of course, this was considered a prank, and he purposely created this fake documentation as a prank, claiming that he learned this type of Maltese pseudo-Arabic dialect during an expedition in Malta. He was of a Maltese heritage, and this is a kind of a synonymous of the way Sicilian culture also incorporates humor in this nurturing attitude toward the newcomers, the new presence of culture that is both similar and different than one's own. And the beautiful aesthetics that the Council of Egypt, the main book that we refer to by Leonardo Sciascia, displays, it's essential to our understanding of Islamic culture in Sicily and in general in the central Mediterranean area. Now, this book was published much later, was published in 1963, and unlike the Leper by Giuseppe Tomasi Lampedusa, who focused on aristocratic society, Sciascia explored the relationship between history, knowledge, and political power, and it is an indication of how Sicily Muslim and Arabic past continue to influence identity because it remain part of a collective memory. So in other words, aristocrats, intellectuals, clergy, and ordinary people live within a society shaped by Norman tradition. Sciascia shows that Islam remained part of Sicily's historical consciousness a century after Muslim political rule ended. And in this sense, we have to remember the most famous authors of Arab Sicilian poetry, such as Ibn Hamdis, Abd al-Rahman, al-Atrabanshi, and Ibn Basurun. Especially Ibn Hamdis, who was born in 1056, he's considered one of the greatest Arab poets in Sicily, and he had to leave his origin, his lands, his heritage, due to the Norman conquest, and leaving Sicily, spent the rest of his life in exile, first in Spain and then in Tunisia. And one of the most famous poems he wrote is My Sicily, very often translated in Italian as Sicilia mia.
ذكرت سقية والأسى يهيج للنفس تذكارها ومنزلة للسبا قد خلت وكان بنو الظرف عمارها فإن كنت أخرجت من جنة فإني أحدث أخبارها ولولا ملوحة ماء البكاء حسبت دموعي أنهارها ضحكت ابن 20 من صبوة بكيت ابن 60 أوزارها فلا تعظمن عليك الذنوب إذا كان ربك غفارها.
Some of the most controversial aspects of modern Sicilian and Latin Italic identity had to do with the way Islam in general has been corrupted for political gain and reasons that are more connected to propaganda rather than solid theology, albeit they're in the context of a misinterpreted, purposeful or otherwise, esoteric knowledge related to Sufism. For instance, in the context of the sword of Islam, in the case of Mussolini. Now, the use of Islamic symbols by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany demonstrate the difference between true Islam as a religious civilization and Islam as a political instrument. Now, the most famous example was Mussolini's adoption of the title Sword of Islam in 1937, and it was designed to portray Mussolini as a protector of Muslims and strengthening Italian presence in North Africa and the Middle East. Now, a similar pattern one can find in Nazi Germany, relation with Amin el-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and to some extent the creation of the 13 Balkan Mountain Division of the SS Hancha among the Bosniak, the Bosnian Muslim, providing another example of the political use of Islamic identity. But those examples must be distinguished from Muslim Sicily, from Arabic influence in Sicily. Those examples are anachronistic attempts to utilize propaganda to demonstrate the purity of, you can fill the blank, in contrast to what this type of political ideology wanted to distract. And so it is a arbitrarily utilized attempt to merge esoteric knowledge. Think about the work by Penneganon, for instance, or Julius Evola, for a purpose that is not related to solid theology, whether Sunni or Shia, but a manipulation of esoteric teaching that to some extent one can find related to Sufism, but they are perverted in a way that is materialistically intended. Materialism, which is in stark contrast to the way the Islamic faith profoundly shaped Sicily for over 400 years, establishing a vibrant multi-confessional society since the 820 CE conquest. Under the independent Emirate of Sicily, Islam became a major religious force, coexisting with deep-rooted Christian and Jewish communities. This is but a summary of the beautiful millennia-old history of Sicily, but I hope I clarified the reason why Arab-Norman culture is to be preferred to Viking-Muslim culture as a framework to better understand the complexity of Sicilian history. And I hope that we will continue the conversation in the future. For now, Assab benedica e salam aleikum a tutti.
لا ينقطع الحب في قلبي